hopefully the battery will line out. The thing was on charge all night long, but Hannah said the battery looked a little bit low, so we'll see what happens. Actually, it won't affect class any, but... Okay. We are studying the Bible, how we got it, why we can trust it. And we've seen that the text of the Bible is sound. We've seen that the canon is the books we have or what we're supposed to have. Right? We've looked at the reliability, and we've looked at the archaeology, and we've looked at science last week. And so this week, last week we left off with the issue of creation. And this week we're going to take up that as a side issue. Remember last week we did Genesis 1 and pointed out some of the issues with understanding Genesis 1, and that my view was that oftentimes we get so wrapped up in the scientific aspects of the message in the gospel, the message in Genesis 1, that we forget to look at what it's actually trying to tell us. And we forget to look at, ultimately, Genesis 1 is there to tell us where we fit in the scheme of things. And it starts with the three most important words in the Bible: in the beginning, God. Because that sets the stage for everything that comes after that. And you can actually read all the way through Genesis 1, as people have done for thousands and thousands of years. You can get the core meaning of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and never have to worry about science at all. But in our 21st century world, science is king. Everyone, being scientific is being correct. And so people want to know, how does this line up? And of course, one of the biggest issues with how does it line up is when you read through it, it gives you at least the impression that the world was created in what period of time?
1 week.
1 week, 7 days. Okay. Now, did God need a whole week to create the universe?
No.
Could he have brought it into creation in a millisecond? Yeah. So he could have done this in 7 milliseconds if he wanted to. Now, is there any theological significance to a week? Why would he pick 7 days?
Isn't 7 the number for completion? Perfection?
Yeah. But more importantly, how do we live our lives? What's the fundamental unit of our life? It's a day. Right? And we group, nowadays we probably think the fundamental unit is an hour or a minute. But if we go back to, the time in which the Bible was written, they didn't have watches and clocks. And to talk about somebody being a couple of minutes late, they wouldn't have known what you were talking about. Literally, they would not know what you were even talking about. So, for basics, we tend to think in terms of units of a day. We even have like a show someplace, the days of our life. And so when we group days, what's the first group of days we come to? A week. And we really group our lives around weeks. If I ask how many weeks there are in a year, you instantly know. Right? Ask how many weeks of vacation you get. You instantly know. Right? And God has planned our lives out in weeks, because what do we do on the 7th day? We rest. So, as God is telling us how we are where we fit in the order of things, where we fit in the scheme of things, He's also talking not just about the order of the universe, He's talking about the order of our lives. Now, for a long time, people thought that these days were just days. And why not? God can do it however he wants to do it. Right? He can do it in 7 milliseconds, 7 years, 7 days. So however he wants to do it, he can do it. But it's not always been seen as a slam dunk, even before the modern scientific era. And for example, Augustine wrote about this as to what kind of days these were is extremely difficult or perhaps impossible to say. Now, why would Augustine say that? Well, how do we measure a day?
Summer.
So how do you measure the first day? So even going back to 400, 500 AD, there's at least as early as that far, there was questions about what these days were. And of course that means the theologians get involved in it. And once the theologians get involved in it, you at least have more than one theory. And there's actually 4 theories as to what these days represent. And these translate into 4 views of the time period within Genesis. And the first view is probably the most well-known. It's the young earth theory, which is that these were 7 24-hour days. And of course, you see this in passages like Genesis 1:5, 8, 13, 19, 23, 31, where it seems to mark out the passages of the days. And that's probably the most popular today, but it's certainly by any means not universally accepted. Now, up until science began to pontificate on how old the earth was, why not 7 days? God certainly could do it in 7 days. And so most people held to that view. But once science began to start pointing out that there are things that make the earth appear older, the other views became a little more popular. And one of them is that called the gap theory, that between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there was a destruction of the earth. That God made the earth and it was perfect. And then there was a destruction. And that what we see in Genesis is the recreation of the earth. Oftentimes this destruction is tied to the fall of Satan. So that God creates the universe, everything's nice, Satan falls. In the process of the fall, somehow the earth is devastated, and that what we see in the remaining parts of the chapter is God recreating the earth and then creating man and woman. And that would satisfy science because it would allow for a universe that's very old, and yet God recreates it. And quite frankly, depending on, we're talking miracles here. So depending on, the condition of the destruction, we know, for example, the earth has been devastated many times in ancient history. The meteor striking, wiping out the dinosaurs. For all we know, the Yellowstone volcano could go off this afternoon and wipe out actually probably as far as here in Wisconsin. So we would certainly notice it. It would certainly, it would for all intents and purposes take out the United States as a force in history. Probably take out much of Canada and much of Mexico as well, in addition to devastating the rest of the planet. Now, we don't have to worry about Yellowstone too much because it only goes off about every 600,000 years, but then the last time it went off was 640,000 years ago, so no worries. So we know the earth has been devastated in the past, so exactly what was involved in the devastation and what was involved in the recreation, we don't really know. So, Another theory is that called the Revelation Day theory, and that what is being depicted here is not a chronological 7 days of creation, but a chronological 7 days of revelation. That this was the period of time over which God exposed to Moses the process of creation. And so the 7 days are 7 days in Moses' life, not 7 days in the history of the universe. And then finally, there's what's called the day-age theory, which is that the 7 days are not 7 literal 24-hour days. For example, if we speak of the days of Christ, in the days of Christ, right, are we talking about literal 24-hour period of time? Are we saying, well, in my day, I'm actually getting old enough to be able to say that. In my day, we never did things like that, right? Am I talking about a 24-hour period of time? No. So even in English, we have the concept that a day can represent something other than a 24-hour period of time. And the argument here, for the people to support this, is that the Hebrew word yom in these particular instances is not referring to a literal 24-hour period of day, but some indeterminate age of time, some time frame. And so, for example, the first day would encompass everything from the Big Bang Theory all the way up to, some point before the creation of the solar system, which would account for the sun and the moon being created later on. Somewhat, except as the earth created earlier. So there's issues no matter how you go. And there are Bible-believing, solid Christians who hold all four views. So one of the things we end up with is we want to make sure we avoid getting too wrapped up in our own particular view. That we think our view is the only view, and anybody who disagrees with us isn't really being a Christian or isn't believing in God's Word. And you can look, honestly, you look at the first chapter of Genesis, and you see, and there was morning and there was evening the first day. That tends to think, 24-hour period of time. On the other hand, I could say that's beginning and ending the first day. Right? And so that really seems to support the 24-hour period. On the other hand, let's go to Genesis 2:4. This is chapter 2, verse 4. Now, if you have the NIV, I don't think the NIV covers this very well. One of the nice things about teaching from the book of Genesis, it's real easy to find. All right. Now, the NIV translates this as, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created." Literally, that says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth in the day that they were created." And the word there for day is the same word used in Genesis chapter 1 for day. So if for some reason you had never read the Bible and you were walking along a beach and a box washes up and there's a tattered old book, but the first couple of pages is missing, and the first page, the first text begins in Genesis 2:4. And it says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth on the day that they were created."